The sound of my truck engine echoed down the street that morning as I turned into my driveway, but instead of the usual calm start to my day, I was greeted by a sight that made my jaw tighten and my blood pressure spike. Sitting smugly across my garage door, like it owned the place, was a shiny pearl white SUV. It wasn't just blocking part of the garage, it was parked dead center, making sure I couldn't get my vehicle in or out. I didn't even need to check the license plate to know whose car it was. On the bumper was the familiar HOA permit sticker, and that could only mean one thing. Karen. HOA Karen, the self-appointed ruler of our neighborhood, the one who strutted around with a clipboard and sunglasses like she was some kind of law enforcement officer instead of just a nosy neighbor. I sighed, pulled over to the curb, and stepped out of my truck. Sure enough, tucked under my windshield wiper was a bright red note written in bold block letters: HOA rule, garages are for storage, not vehicles. Until you comply, consider this your warning. I stared at it for a long moment, then burst out laughing, because this wasn't even a rule. It was something Karen had made up in her head. She always came up with ridiculous restrictions and tried to force people into obeying them as though she were the President of the United States instead of the president of a tiny HOA board. But then my laughter faded. Today I actually had somewhere important to be. Blocking my garage wasn't just annoying, it was an outright attack. She had crossed a line, and I knew right then and there I wasn't going to let it slide. Over the past few months, Karen had made life miserable for everyone in the community. She had issued fake violations for leaving a trash can out overnight, tried to fine my neighbor for having a dog that barked at the mailman, and once even threatened to tow a teenager's car because it had too many bumper stickers. This garage stunt wasn't new territory for her, it was just the boldest thing she'd done yet. I took out my phone and snapped a dozen photos from different angles. If dealing with the HOA had taught me anything, it was that documentation is your shield. But I also knew Karen practically controlled the board, which meant a complaint would go nowhere. They'd probably just laugh at me behind closed doors. No, this time I needed a response that would hit harder, something so unforgettable that Karen would never dare to mess with me, or my garage, again. As I paced in front of my blocked garage, an idea began to form. At first, it seemed crazy, wild, petty, but the more I thought about it, the more perfect it sounded. I had friends in construction and logistics, guys who worked with heavy machinery every day. And one of them owed me a favor. Why bother calling a tow truck, which would be slow and boring, when I could make a statement that Karen, and the entire neighborhood, would never forget? I made a phone call, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was bubbling with excitement inside. My friend picked up, and after a few minutes of explaining the situation, he laughed so hard I thought he'd drop the phone. "You're serious?" he asked. I told him I'd never been more serious. "All right," he said, "give me an hour." An hour later, as the neighborhood was still quiet with people sipping coffee and watering their lawns, the faint thrum of rotor blades began to grow louder in the distance. At first, it was a low hum, then it grew into a roar that made windows tremble. People stepped outside, shielding their eyes, pointing at the sky. And then, over the row of houses, a helicopter appeared. It wasn't some massive military bird, but it was plenty big enough for the job. Attached to it were steel cables and hooks, glinting in the morning sun. The pilot maneuvered the helicopter skillfully until it hovered directly above my driveway. The wind whipped through the street, rattling leaves and sending Karen's neat little potted plants tumbling over. My neighbors were wide-eyed, some with phones out already recording. The pilot lowered the cables, and with a few quick motions, my friend and I strapped them securely around Karen's SUV. For a moment, I almost couldn't believe what I was doing. And then, slowly, the SUV lifted off the ground. The scene was surreal. There it was, Karen's pride and joy, her pearl white SUV, dangling 50 feet in the air like some kind of oversized ornament. The crowd that had gathered gasped, then erupted into laughter and cheers. Someone shouted, "Finally, someone put Karen in her place." Another neighbor clapped and yelled, "Get it out of here." I stood there with my arms crossed, the morning sun warming my back, as the helicopter began to drift away, carrying the SUV like it was nothing more than a cardboard box. For a brief second, the sight took my breath away. I could already picture Karen's reaction when she saw her car flying away. And sure enough, just as the helicopter was disappearing over the rooftops, here she came. Karen came storming down the street in her robe and slippers, her hair a tangled mess, waving her arms and screaming over the noise. Her voice cracked as she yelled, "You can't do this. That's my car. Put it down right now." She jumped up and down like a child throwing a tantrum. Neighbors just shook their heads, some laughing, some filming. But the SUV didn't stop. The helicopter carried it further and further away. And where was it going? Straight to the one place that would make the biggest statement of all, the mayor's mansion. Karen had bragged endlessly about being close friends with the mayor, using his name as a weapon to scare people into listening to her fake rules. Well, if she wanted the mayor's name tied to her power trip, then she was about to get her wish in the most humiliating way possible. By the time the SUV disappeared into the horizon, Karen was practically foaming at the mouth. She whipped out her phone, screaming into it, probably calling the cops or anyone else she thought would help her. But me, I just leaned back against my truck, smiling as I watched the chaos. Because this time, it wasn't me who was trapped. It was Karen, and her little empire of control was about to come crashing down, literally and publicly, in front of the mayor himself. The news spread faster than wildfire through the neighborhood. By the time I got into my truck and drove toward the mayor's side of town, half the block had already posted videos online. Clips of the SUV dangling in the air like a kid's toy were racking up views within minutes. You could hear people laughing in the background of every recording, and one neighbor even added commentary like it was a sports game. "And there it goes, folks, watch Karen's car flying over Elm Street." I didn't even need to say a word, the internet was already doing the talking for me. Still, I wanted to be there to see what happened when the SUV touched down, so I followed the helicopter at a distance. When I got closer to the mayor's mansion, I nearly doubled over laughing at the sight. The mansion sat on a sprawling piece of land, with neatly trimmed hedges, expensive flower beds, and a perfect green lawn that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. Right in the center of all that beauty, the helicopter gently lowered Karen's SUV. The wheels sank slightly into the soft grass, squashing the flower bed beside it. The cables unclipped, and then the helicopter lifted away, leaving the car sitting there like it had been parked on purpose. It was so absurd, so out of place, that for a second, I thought I was dreaming. But the best part came moments later when the front door of the mansion burst open and out stormed the mayor himself, wearing a bathrobe and slippers, clearly furious about being disturbed. He marched across the lawn with his arms raised, shouting, "What is the meaning of this? Who left a vehicle on my property?" That was the exact moment Karen arrived in her own little parade. She had sprinted behind the helicopter, screaming into her phone the whole time, and now she was out of breath but still shouting, pointing her finger at me like I was some criminal mastermind. "That's my car. He took it. He kidnapped my car," she wailed. The mayor stopped dead in his tracks and turned to look at her, his eyes narrowing. "This is yours?" he asked sharply. Karen stammered, suddenly not so confident, and tried to explain herself. "Yes, but you don't understand. He was violating HOA rules, and I had to block his garage." "I was just enforcing the regulations," the mayor cut her off with a booming voice. "Regulations? You dropped your car in the middle of my lawn because of some petty neighborhood squabble. Do you have any idea how ridiculous this looks? How embarrassing this is for me?" His face was red with rage, and neighbors who had followed to watch were giggling, covering their mouths, trying not to burst out laughing. Karen's bravado melted away in an instant. She tried to backpedal, muttering that she was friends with the mayor and that she thought he'd understand. But the mayor's response was priceless. "Friends? Don't you dare drag my name into your nonsense. You've made me the center of a circus, and I will not tolerate it." The crowd of neighbors, now larger than ever, pulled out their phones to record. Some even live-streamed the confrontation, and comments began flooding in online. "Karen gets owned by the mayor," and "instant karma." Meanwhile, Karen was desperately trying to figure out how to get her SUV off the lawn. She barked at me to bring it back, but before I could say a word, the sheriff's deputy pulled up in a patrol truck, lights flashing. He stepped out slowly, tipping his hat, and walked toward the scene with a smirk on his face. Karen rushed to him like he was her savior, screaming, "Arrest him! He stole my car. He airlifted it and dumped it here." The deputy raised his eyebrows, looked at me, then back at her. "Ma'am, I've already seen the pictures of you blocking his garage. He told us what he planned, and technically, he just relocated your car to a safe spot. I'd call that creative problem solving, not theft." The crowd erupted into laughter again, and Karen's face turned beet red. The mayor, still fuming, turned to the deputy. I don't care what you call it. Get this eyesore off my property immediately. The deputy nodded but then turned back to Karen. Well ma'am, since it's your car, that's your responsibility. You'll need to arrange for a tow. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. She stomped her foot and shouted, I can't afford a tow for this distance. But nobody cared. The sheriff folded his arms and said firmly, maybe next time, don't block someone's garage. It took Karen over 3 hours to get a tow company willing to come haul her SUV off the mayor's lawn. By that time, hundreds of people had seen the spectacle, and the videos online had exploded into a viral sensation. Headlines read, "WA Queen gets humbled, Karen's car takes flight," and my personal favorite, "Neighborhood Justice by Helicopter." Even local news stations showed up, interviewing witnesses and laughing about the absurdity of it all. For once, the neighborhood was united, not against me, but against Karen. When Karen's SUV was finally dragged off the lawn, the mayor gave her one last piece of advice in front of everyone. Stay out of my business, and stay off my lawn. And if I ever hear my name tied to your WA games again, you'll regret it. The crowd cheered, neighbors clapped, and Karen scurried off, humiliated beyond belief. From that day forward, she stopped blocking my garage, stopped leaving fake violation notes, and kept her distance whenever she saw me. Her power over the WA board started crumbling, too, as people lost respect for her after the viral videos. The board couldn't take her seriously anymore, not after she'd made the entire neighborhood, and even the mayor, a laughingstock. As for me, I got my peace and quiet back. My garage was never blocked again, and whenever I parked my truck, I couldn't help but grin at the memory of Karen's car soaring over the rooftops. I didn't just win against her pettiness, I gave the whole neighborhood a story they'd never forget. Sometimes, standing up to an HOA tyrant doesn't take yelling, lawsuits, or endless meetings. Sometimes, all it takes is a little imagination, a phone call to the right friend, and one very memorable helicopter ride. And that, my friends, is how WA Karen learned the hard way that messing with the wrong neighbor can land you, literally, on the mayor's lawn.